Welcome to Microcollege, a podcast exploring innovative, place-based, and humanly scaled responses to the crises in higher education, meaning, and discourse in our time. Everyone knows that colleges and universities are at a breaking point, but what can be done? I'm Jacob Hunt, the director of Thoreau College, a microcollege in Viroqua, Wisconsin. Join us each week as we tackle this question head-on. Welcome to Microcollege. This week, we are honored to have as our guest Willie E. Jones III, who is an actor, director, producer, and playwright, who is the founding actor and manager of the Jones Classical Theater Company of Chicago, Illinois. He is the artistic director of the Juneteenth Theater Justice Project, a co-founder of the Minnesota Black Theater Circle, was the executive producer of the Blackness Theater Arts Festival, and also serves on the board of Yellow Tree Theater in Osseo, Minnesota. Willie is a graduate of the Guthrie Theater B.F.A. actor training program at the University of Minnesota and is here in Viroqua this week as the director of As You Like It at the first ever Viroqua Shakespeare Festival, which he is co-producing in collaboration with Thoreau College. Welcome, Willie.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. That sounded really much more impressive than it is, I promise.
Well, we don't know that. Yeah, we're very excited to have you here. And I know that there's a lot of excitement around town about this event. And just thank you for bringing Shakespeare in this way to our little town and to Thoreau College. So thank you. Here on Microcollege, we like to ground everything that we do in storytelling, in biography. And so we like to ask our guests to start off by saying, just reflecting back on where you were out of high school, and what were you doing? What were the really salient, important experiences of that period that led you to what you're doing today?
Well, I was always on a fast track to this life from when I first discovered I wanted to act. It was really more of an addiction, really. What's funny is I was intending to do film and TV. I hated theater. As an underclassman in high school, I thought it was pretentious. I thought it was inaccessible. I thought film was far superior, 14 years old. And then you sort of, perform in front of a live audience and night after night, and you go, there's something alive about this that you don't get in film and TV, the laughter, the responses. So from when I was 15, 16, I knew this is what I wanted to do. The struggle was, where was I going to do it, right? I knew I wanted to go to college for it. I wanted a degree in it. I wanted to study it. The problem is that when you go to a small public school, not a big art school, you don't hear about stuff like Unifieds, where everyone convenes in Chicago and auditions for colleges. You don't know about big programs. So I only auditioned for 3 places, and it came down between 2. And, it was a real struggle because one was in my opinion at the time, a better program that offered no money. And the other one was a program that offered a lot of money. And so the debate was a matter of, do I want to take on that many student loans? And eventually the answer was no. So I find myself in Minnesota. Minneapolis.
Where did you grow up?
Orlando, Florida.
Oh.
So that's a culture shock for certain. I'd visited New York in the winter and the Northeast, but there was nothing to prepare me for what I was told was the worst winter in 25 years, my freshman year. But, freshman year, I fell deeper in love with it because you're in it, you're surrounded by it constantly, and you're surrounded by people who also want to do it, and that makes a difference in a person's life. Meaning theater.
Yeah.
It makes a huge difference. In a public high school, some kids are doing theater just because they have nowhere else to go or their friends are doing it. So everyone's not on the same level of passion. Yeah. Everyone's not on the same level of intensity. In college, that is the case. Even if they're not going to do it after, they're still going to do it.
And this is a special program. And people who've listened to the podcast may have heard Liam McGilligan, who's the producer of the show, who's also a graduate of this program, describe it. In a way, it's part of the University of Minnesota. This is a Big Ten, huge school, but it is, in a sense, a microcollege within that campus. Just for people who maybe hadn't heard Liam's description, can you describe the Guthrie Performing Arts program?
Yes. So it is a very intensive 4-year conservatory-style program with a liberal arts component, which means essentially you're in acting class 11 to 10, including rehearsal, Monday through Saturday. and you better find a way to fit your gen eds in before 11. You know what I mean? It's super intense, and it's you and the same 18, 20 people every class, every show. You often stay together in the same dorms, and you have all the classes in the same building. You don't meet anybody else. You don't really feel, for most of us, you don't feel like you're a part of the college, because 12 hours out of the day, you're in the theater. So it's very intensive and small, and a few people find external friends here and there, but generally, generally you don't. So it's tight knit, very, very tight knit.
So you felt like this was a good preparation for heading out into the theater world afterwards?
It's what I wanted, right? Like, I wanted something really intense. I wanted something that was going to make me a good actor, so I didn't have to spend more money on grad school. So I loved the intensity. I loved not having a life outside of it. It's not for everyone. If you are a free spirit, if you are hoping to go to a B.F.A where you can also, maybe join a sorority or see you can do it, but man, are you going to be exhausted, So it worked for me, but it's not for everyone, certainly.
So Willie, you talked a little bit about, the money aspect of your decision for which program. When I was talking about the B.F.A program and when I was auditioning, so I was a year above Willie, so I came into the program 1 year before Willie. One of the the taglines that drew me was them talking about the Guthrie Theater Actor Training Program seeks to cultivate the actor, artist, scholar, and citizen. I don't know if that language rings a bell with you, but for me that was a calling card, both the conservatory training, the Guthrie Theater connection, but the liberal arts component. I'm wondering but you talked a little bit about the financial decision, but what about the curriculum and
Sure.
What else brought you to the program?
I loved classical theater. I love it. And I didn't know I loved it until I got there. The thing about that program, the way, at least, it's changing as things are, but it used to be very, very classical. Joe Price, who ran the program at the time, would say, if you can master the masters, you can master anyone. If you can master the guy who's being performed 2,000 years still, we're talking, Agamemnon, the Osseo, Greek tragedies. If you can do that well, you can do the new play 5 years ago. That's what drew me personally. The liberal arts component also drew me until I realized I had no time to minor, no time to double major. And at first I was saddened by it, but after the first 2 months, I was like, thank God someone told us not to do this, because there's no time. But for a lot of people, they love the liberal arts component because the professors want to impact you. A lot of acting programs try to make you into a mold of what an actor should be. I believe our program is really good at taking who you are and expanding upon that, not asking you to change. And so that tagline is true. They build scholars, they build, like, a lot of people graduate, I find, our program, they don't even go into acting. They become playwrights, they become voice coaches, they become teaching artists. And I think that's a sign of how our program cultivates you as a person. No one feels like they have to be an actor, I don't think.
Yeah, so I think when you look at your projects, things you've worked on, including coming here to Viroqua with As You Like It, but also some of the things you talk about on your website, which people can find in the show notes. You say, here's one of the things you write on the website. It is important to us that audiences of all backgrounds and ideas know that they are welcomed at the Jones Theater, where diverse thoughts and ideas are presented, critiqued, and discussed in the highest quality, in the name of truth. We have no interest in giving comfort. Our primary focus and primary interest is to create a theatrical environment in which all people can gather and laugh, talk, debate, cry, and breathe together. So your aims are beyond entertaining people, right? Can you talk about, like, what, in the broadest sense, why is theater important in culture, in our society today?
It's like the last place where you have human interaction anymore. You know what I mean? No one's going to the movie theaters. Like, it got to the point where movies have to state, we're also releasing this in theaters too.
Right.
And when you're in the movie theater, what do you see people doing? They're texting, they're on their phone, they're at a concert, what are they doing? They're, vlogging it or putting it on Instagram, or, the theater is a place where you go, and it doesn't matter what political party you are, it doesn't matter where you come from, you sit and you take in a story together. and you interpret it differently, but there are no phones. You laugh together. You don't care about, pardon me, but you don't care about, who are you voting for? You don't care about what did you do 30 years ago? All you care about is that I'm here with 100 other people watching, I don't know, Hamlet bare his soul, and we can all relate to that in some way. That's why it's necessary. We have to keep the theater alive, or else we're going to lose the human condition, aren't we? Or I think so.
That's pretty important.
Really important. The connectivity.
What's striking about that is, I think a lot of people might think that movies killed off the theater 100 years ago.
Well, people have been saying, at first radio was going to kill the theater, and then TV was going to kill the theater, and then movies are going. The only people that can kill theater is people. If they'd stop deciding it's important, if they stop deciding to go, that's what's going to kill the theater, is if people don't find interest in it, or if they only find interest in commercial theater, adaptations, movie adaptations made into musicals and vice versa. I don't think it'll survive very long if that's our daily diet of theater. But if we can continue to do classics, plays with words and no music and no dancing, just watching human beings be human, live in front of you. We do it all the time on TV. I just theorize, I wonder if there's something about this generation that takes greater comfort in connecting through a screen, even if it comes to your entertainment, than it does live. And I know people will say, oh, concerts. Well, yeah, because they want you to have your phones out. They're okay
Right.
with that. We're talking about a place where you don't worry about it for a couple hours, And that's anxiety inducing for a lot of people. But I think we have to do it. I think we have to keep gathering live, just for the sake of knowing there are other people out there. I don't know. COVID was so isolating. And I guess people enjoy that. Like, no one wants to go work in an office anymore. Everybody wants to work from home, and it concerns me a
It turned
little.
going to a theater into something that was sort of scary and dangerous
Yeah.
too. And that I think that
Yes.
some of that still hangs over.
It does. Well, it doesn't help, right, that most theater audiences are over 60.
Yeah.
So they're the most at risk. And yet their dollars have been supporting the American theater for like 50 years.
So what you're doing here in Viroqua this week is pretty different from all of that. So you're bringing, first of all, you're doing Shakespeare, a real classic kind of theater, the classic of the classics, and but you're doing it with a mixed group of people who are professionals, people who've done this on a higher level, and local actors who've been recruited into it. You're doing it outside. You're doing it for free. Yep. Maybe describe a little bit about the vision for this theater festival, the Shakespeare Festival that you're doing here.
Certainly. So this model was inspired by what the Royal Shakespeare Company did last summer. This is not my idea. I stole this from the artistic director at the time. He did this project. They were doing the history plays, Shakespeare, and he did that. He used members from the Royal Shakespeare Company, and he cast locals. And they asked him, why'd you do it? He said, because I think people will have a greater appreciation for Shakespeare if they're speaking the language as opposed to having it spoken at them or lectured at them. And I was like, that's kind of brilliant. That's really brilliant. Like, you don't know how great Shakespeare is until you're doing it, until you're feeling it or you're watching it. And so I was like, this model is great. Like, professionals intermingling with, community members of that community. It also shows a sense of care for that community, doesn't it? That we're not above it all, or as it were. And what I've found is that, community members are more talented than anyone can ever expect. People have backgrounds, people have lives you know nothing about, So why presume they can't do it as opposed to saying, let's see if we can, I think.
So the context here, it's out of doors. It's I think there's an attempt here to create a festival atmosphere around it. There's going to be apple cider making, things like this. So I think that's different from going to a professional theater in a city. That sort of. What's about that environment? What's benefit?
Well,
what's added by that?
The name festival should be a festival. A lot of these Shakespeare festivals means you kind of go, you watch, and then you leave. That's not a festival. That's just watching a show. Like, a festival should be a festival. There should be things there to do. There should be a sonnet reading like we have, or there should be apple cider, or there should be a harpist, or there should be things to interact with. Respecting audiences, I think, for me, is what this festival is about. Not just, I feel like the theater gives off the impression that your job as an audience is to come in your fancy clothes, sit down in our dark theater, and watch us do amazing things. And they think doing the play is enough. Doing the play is not enough. You have to interact with the community. And this is the best way to do it, I think.
Thoreau College is a leader in an emergent movement dedicated to the renewal and revitalization of higher education through the creation of new, humanly scaled institutions with holistic curricula known as microcolleges. Thoreau College, higher education for the whole human being.
And why Shakespeare, right? We had a couple weeks ago, we had Professor David W. Orr, who's an eminent professor who's interested in ecology, the environment, higher education. But somehow or another, in that conversation, Shakespeare came up, and he includes very much this classic literature and maybe especially Shakespeare in the type of education he's describing, which is oriented kind of ecologically. And we asked him what does Shakespeare have to do with this? And he said, everything has to do with it. So for you, why is it important that Shakespeare, what does Shakespeare bring to modern audiences?
How long do we have? What confuses people is they go, oh yeah, it's been 450 years, but no one's doing Greeks like that. And my response is, exactly. That's the point. Someone's performed 450 years later constantly. We still want it. You see what I'm saying? However, there is a misconception in this country that all we do is Shakespeare. It's not true. Actually, only about 13% of all plays done in this country are classic. And of that, 40% are Shakespeare. We're not even tapped into that canon, but that stat is still telling. Shakespeare, look, he covers the human condition better than anyone. Maybe August Wilson, is up there too, but the forgiveness, empathy, jealousy, pride. Do we not feel these things? Are we not complex people? And I understand the question because it's asked a lot these days. Why Shakespeare these days? Especially as people try to shelve him. Call him dated or these things. But I encourage people to read the plays and dissect them because there's a lot of social context to when Shakespeare was writing. Take Henry VIII, for example. Well, when he wrote Henry VIII, Shakespeare knew Henry VIII was this awful man, but he was working for his great-granddaughter. He was working for Elizabeth. So he's not going to write a truthful play about how, the guy in her family line was this awful human. But people don't know that. So they go, how dare he put Henry VIII in a positive light? Yeah, he didn't want to be beheaded. So, he kind of had to, or you take something like The Merchant of Venice, which is hotly debated. My argument is there are no good people in that play. And that's the point. Mm-hmm. Our ingenue Portia, the one who talks about mercy, is a staunch racist. That's complexity. Yes, Shylock, I feel bad for him. He lacks mercy. Everyone in that play is dirty, but that's not how we want to see things. We want good guys and we want bad guys. And then you throw on top of it being live to watch the griminess of humanity, but that's what Shakespeare brings. And I can see the distaste for it, but I think if we run away from the complexities of art, we're never going to understand it. And then it'll die eventually.
So another thing that you say on your website is, to us, theater should be a place that prioritizes truth over comfort. What do you mean by that?
The theater should provide no obligation to be your safe space as an audience member. It's a movie will give you, this is rated R for the following things. Are people going on IMDb and getting spoiler alerts before you watch a movie? I don't think so. You go and see the movie. So why is it in the theater? Why does the theater need to be our safe space? But movies, they can take all the chances in the world. TV can make all the risks, but the theater has to be safe. And for us, it's like, no, we're going to tackle hard issues. We're going to do plays you're not a fan of. And we're not going to do it just to incense you, just to be contrarian, but because there is a point of view, there is a perspective you have not taken in. And, it's hard to do these days. Like, I'll be very frank, like, it's honestly scary. Cancel culture has made doing the theater scary in many ways because you never know who's going to, be upset about the way you cast or be upset about the show you're doing. However, that's the reason to do it. Isn't it? I don't think we can run away from the complexities of the theater. I just don't. I think the alternative is, adaptations of popular movies into musicals. You know what I mean? So you ask why Shakespeare? It's because it reveals the very things that scare us. He reveals the things that make us insecure. He reveals things in us. You see Portia, you identify with her. She seems really, really sweet at first, and then the only black character in the play comes in and she writes him off and says, let him take all his complexion with him. And then 4 acts from then, you're going to tell Shylock to be merciful? And then Shylock begs for mercy earlier, and then later he's not going to be merciful. I think we see ourselves most in Shakespeare, and that scares us. You know what I mean? I think we don't want it to be as pretty. I think we want it to be more pretty than it is, but even when it comes to high schools, and I'm a high school theater fan, English teachers often neglect the complexities of Shakespeare too. They study Romeo and Juliet and Midsummer, not realizing the depth that comes with, Romeo and Juliet opens with a long rape joke.
Right.
They don't cover that. They didn't tell me that in middle school. A Midsummer Night's Dream, the lovers at the end have all just consummated their love for each other. They didn't teach me that in 8th grade.
Yeah.
And that's the part I think we're running away from.
Yeah, in my experience, I've been a high school teacher. I've taught Romeo and Juliet. Shakespeare, you definitely connect with 9th graders, 10th graders when you point out the dirty jokes.
Yes, yes.
Then you got them.
Then you got them.
But also performance, right? Either seeing a good performance or doing even some scenes like that. Takes it from being kind of very difficult to understand language on a page to something that's alive, and then people can run with it.
I completely agree, and I love I went into college. I wanted to be a high school theater teacher. I forgot to mention that because I'm still best friends with mine. He's my mentor. He changed my life. Jeff Cook, huge shout out to you. So that was what I was going to do. Of course, the public school system these days is not exactly a holiday, the way they treat teachers. So that kind of changed my mind, unfortunately. But high school theater teachers are underrated. Like they're the basis for the cog. Like they take, these insecure 14-year-olds and they send them out into the world with confidence to audition and, side tangent, but shout out to the high school theater teachers out there. It's a hard job. Absolutely. You're there from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Rehearse every day, rehearsing.
Yes, teachers, high school teachers, elementary school teachers in general know that they're in far beyond the actual hours on the job.
Yes.
But the theater directors, the theater teachers are even more so, and those performance weeks and that's absolutely true.
Doesn't include the field trips, to see shows, and we did the Florida State Thespian Festival, so he has to go to Tampa, and then it's a hard job, and they're underpaid, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Terribly.
As a teacher, I would say, I've often reflected that among the most important things in my preparation to be a teacher, and I was never a director exactly, but literature teacher, science teacher, but was my own theater experiences in high school and college, right? That was the improv and just stage presence and projecting your voice and all the things that you learn as even a beginning kind of actor were essential. And so I recommend that always to people who are thinking about being a teacher. Do some theater.
Do some theater, yeah. It also teaches you how to kind of get out of your own way, doesn't it? How to trust, Teachers have to trust their students. And that can be hard. They kind
of get up there and forget their lines or whatever,
Yep. And theater teaches you to trust, doesn't it? Because you don't have a choice. You got to hope they get their line out. You hope it's the right line, So I can definitely see how theater is a great preparer for that.
Yes. So what do you have a favorite Shakespeare play or a favorite character?
Oh, yeah. Richard III is my favorite play ever. And I read it when I was 12. I don't know why. I don't know why the 3.5-hour history play was what they had middle schoolers doing at this summer camp.
Yeah.
But and I'll be honest, I understood none of that play at the time. It immediately became my favorite play because for some reason, I don't know why. I'm 12 years old. I'm reading the play and I'm like, Richard III's just the school bully. Like, he comes out deformed. His mother hates him before he even is able to talk. He says it. Doesn't have a father. And his entire life, he's been neglected by his mom. You know, even at the end, he is. And I'm like, that sounds like a school bully to me, someone who probably has a bad home life, bad life. So I related to Richard, and I was like, I'm not supposed to, but I do. And I attributed that to Shakespeare. So it's been my favorite play forever.
Isn't that interesting? I think there has been I don't know, it seems like a fad for like films and so forth that focus on the villains. And like, I've got young kids and these, like, oh, the villains are being brought back as the heroes in various stories. But I think Shakespeare was doing that long ago, right? They're definitely to identify with these villains was something that he was able to make you do.
And that's the scary part because Richard's also hilarious. He's such a funny character. And it stinks because he does such awful things, But that's scary because, like, man, if I were that charming and if my life was like that, would I also? Because he feels like he has to usurp the throne because he's never gotten anything. His parents didn't show him any love because he came out deformed before he even spoke a word. It doesn't excuse his behavior, but if you're telling me you can't empathize or you can't see that perspective, I encourage you to go to the theater.
Yeah. And it does seem like that's a quality we desperately need more in our society. A lot of people have different ideas of who the villain is in our culture. So sometimes it'd be helpful to understand
what's interesting
who they are.
about that? They're often not terribly well traveled. Like the media is going to show you, so and so from this state or so and so from this is how they're acting. But until you've been there to a town with opposite ideas of yours, that's why I loved growing up in Orlando. It was a true melting pot of politics. We're right in the center of Florida. So above us are a lot of the red, as you get closer to Georgia, and below us is a lot of the blue. And growing up in that environment, that was awesome for me because I sat next to people I didn't agree with, and I was there during Trump's era. We were able to be friends, if you talk to a human being, and you don't just stick in your bubble where you're affirming yourself, which is also not research, that's affirming yourself, you'll discover people are not as simple as, oh, how could you think that? Or, look, no, it's complex. Go to where the other half lives. And that's where the statement on the website comes from. Because I feel like the theater is exclusionary, and no one's going to talk about it, but the theater is very exclusionary. They don't want older people there anymore. They definitely don't want, liberal or Democrats there. And my argument is, how do you expect them to broaden the horizons you wish them to broaden if you don't welcome them to the place that, you know what I'm saying? It makes zero. That's the point of the Jones Classical Company, is like everyone from all politics, walks of life, come see the show. You're welcome here. Your ideas are welcome here. Not that I have to agree, but the fact that you feel welcome makes a difference. And that's the irony of this whole thing, is that the theater has become a place where, people are preaching to the choir. And I know sometimes the choir needs to be reminded why it sings, but we've been reminded for about 30 years now. And I think it's time to stop telling people you disagree with that they're not welcome and be mad that they don't, take on a perspective you wish they would, because you're not introducing them to that perspective. You understand? It's a backwards model. And it comes from fear. It comes from years of, look, the theater ain't perfect, but my goodness, this thing of, fire all your board members, start anew. You're kidding me, right? Just the impractical things that people are willing to ask of organizations in order to feel comforted. It's impractical and it's unfair. It's unfair to the people who want to see theater, and it's unfair, frankly, to states like Indiana, to all the red states who, quote unquote, lack theater for a reason, because no one's interested. You have to be interested in people. You have to be interested in community to do this. You really, really do. You can't just think, I'm going to go to Chicago, I'm going to go to New York, and I'm going to change the world. No, you're not. You're just going to reinforce the popular ideas of New York and Chicago and LA and, no, going someplace where discussion can happen. And that's why I love this town, because we're in a world that's trying to push Shakespeare away, and this town's like, bring it on. We want the complexity. That is attractive. That is attractive. And there are more places like that, but, you can't say that sort of thing these days, or else people will take it the wrong way. But I firmly believe that if the theater can become a political melting pot, the world will be a better place. Because you talk to each other, you know what I mean? No, I don't know what your political party is, but I see you at intermission, and I'm like, good show, eh? Yeah, what do you think of it, Put your phone away. You know what I mean?
It's a good starting place, right?
Talk to people. Don't assume, you know what I mean? And I also, and I'll close it here, it's kind of hypocritical to be a theater artist and lack empathy. It's hypocritical to be a theater artist and be unforgiving, It's, how can you teach King Lear and not be a forgiving person? That entire story is redemption, How can you teach The Tempest and not believe in forgiveness? I mean, how do you go into prisons and teach inmates Shakespeare and then perpetuate a culture that puts people there? That doesn't make any sense to me. You see what I'm saying?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Dissect the plays for what they are, not for what you want them to be. And that's the other thing too, like in this As You Like It, there are certainly some dated things I didn't cut because people are complicated. Mm-hmm. No one's perfect, Spoiler alert, Rosalind uses the term Ethiop, which is at that time was a negative connotation. I didn't cut it. What? Are you going to hate Rosalind because of one line? And what does that say about you that you do that? Mm-hmm. That's why you keep the complexities in there. Audiences have to remember plays are for you to reflect on yourself. You're supposed to see a play, watch it, enjoy it, but then talk about how you relate to it in some way. And I don't know if it's whether or not people are insecure that they have those biases too. You can still be a good person. Like, it's okay. Like, no one's perfect. But that's why I think people are trying to cancel Shakespeare because, it's dated, but deal with it. People are imperfect. And a lot of these ideals, people still have. You know what I mean? But you can't run away from it. And you certainly can't cancel people who don't think the same as you in that respect. How are you going to cancel someone for producing The Merchant of Venice? Because you feel differently. Not because there's factual evidence that it has a negative. You know what I'm saying? It's a theory. It's all theory. But I started this company to combat that, very, very frankly. I started this company to combat that culture, go to towns, meet the people, talk to them. What are their politics? Why is that? Genuine curiosity is gone, isn't it? I feel like when someone asks me a question, it's kind of like a trap sometimes these days. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's like, are you asking me this because you really want to know? You want to talk? Or are you asking me this because you're trying to catch me? Right. You know what I mean?
Microcollege is recorded in the broadcast studios of WDRT Viroqua 91.9 FM, Driftless Community Radio on Main Street in Viroqua, Wisconsin. Thanks to Jim and all the folks at WDRT for the support of Thoreau College and the Microcollege podcast.
Yeah, so talk more about your vision for the Jones Classical Theater Company. I mean, you're bringing this play here to Viroqua. I guess my sense is a part of your vision is to do this in other small towns in the Midwest.
Yes. I want to stick with the Midwest because the potential here is insane. There's, first of all, the biggest commodity lacked in the theater is space. Midwest has a ton of it, ton of space. It's outdoors, but that's good. That's good. You can seat more people. People can have a picnic. You can do festivals. So yes, I'm certainly, we're doing the Minnesota Shakespeare Festival next summer, and that will take place in Minneapolis. So not a small town, but I had to use the connections I had just to get it off the ground. But certainly, I would love to take this to Gary, Indiana is a place that comes to mind as a place I think could really benefit from something like this. There are small Illinois, I don't want people to feel like they can only go to Chicago or Normal, where the Illinois Shakespeare Festival is, Yeah, small towns in the Midwest, man. Give them theater.
I think one of the things that you're tapping into is there is actually a deep tradition of this. I think if you go back 100 years, let's say, before movies and TV, a lot of people often trace these together. The towns like Viroqua, and in much smaller towns than this, we're here in the county seat there, but there were towns of 100 people, sprinkled all over the Midwest that had their own bands, their own orchestras, their own theaters, schools. There was a really rich, thriving rural culture across the Midwest. Sometimes it was ethnic. There were people speaking German or Polish or Norwegian, but there was also I think a lot of Shakespeare performed actually in these places. So there's a way that this is a revival of something that's very old.
Yes, and that's how summer stock began. Summer stock started in farms.
Say more about summer stock.
Yeah, so summer stock is really low budget theater done during the summer where a company will use the same costumes, the same set for multiple shows, probably for the season to save money, and the actors perform in more than one show at once, and oftentimes, not much anymore, but it was very common, they would also build the set, and they'd strike. A lot of them still haven't striked the set, so it was very all hands on deck. But, they started because people didn't want to go into the cities, to have to get their entertainment, and so they were like, well, we have all this land, and we have all this space, we might as so it's always been a thing. I feel like that's something film and TV has done to the theater, is it's created a culture of actors who don't want to do the theater anymore. You see what I mean? Everyone wants to do film and TV. So then I feel like it became very commercial when that really started to take off. Then it was like, well, yeah, I can go to LA and audition for film, and there's some theater there. You know what I mean? Or I can go to New York, they're filming there, and there's, theater there. You know what I mean? And of course, Broadway is the layman's idea of what theater is. Musical theater, it became very, very dominant. It's the only, real American invention in the theater, which is also why we love it, because we invented it. But I feel like we should get back to that. I feel like the theater is at a point right now, it's at a crossroads. Nobody really knows how to move forward yet. We're all kind of still feeling it out, coming back from COVID. This is only the second season where people are doing full seasons again. So I'm hoping that there's a resurgence in smaller town theaters popping up, and a greater respect for community theaters. I mean, some of the oldest theaters in this country are community theaters still. They haven't become professional. I love that. Yeah. We need that.
Yeah. So here in the rural Midwest, many people's experience of theater is strictly high school, or if they're lucky, a community theater group. So here in Viroqua, there's been a very active community theater scene, as well as a lot of school theater going on. But a professional theater, or people who are doing something that they're traveling from place to place, that's pretty special or unusual.
Yeah, I mean, touring is expensive, so people don't do it a lot, but you can make it happen. My mom always told me, people make time for what they want to. That's just how it works. If you really want to do it, you'll find a way. We find ways to be on TikTok for several hours, don't we? I mean, we find ways to do things, and I wish for the future of the theater to be what's happening here. People going to these towns that have a desire for it too. That's the other thing, is that these towns want it. People want things to do, People want entertainment, and it means something to them too. You know what I mean? That's really important if the focus is audiences, but I don't think the focus has been on audiences for a long time. I think the focus has really been on the artist, which sounds like it should be, but no, it shouldn't be. Artists are servants. We are public servants. We truly are. My job is to go up there and cry for 2 hours so that you can reflect on yourself. That's the public servitude. So if it's about audiences, then what are we even talking about? If you have a group of people who, go give it to them. You have the sources, but it's not about audiences. It's about Broadway, Hollywood,
That's a fascinating perspective. I think that's when I'm working with young people, whether it's high school students or college students, right? Finding your vocation, your calling, your whatever it is you're going to do in your life, your mission. orientation towards service is such a touchstone for that, right? That's in the long term, that's a meaningful kind of a life. And if you're an artist, right, it's often not framed in that way, right? It is like, I've got something to share with the world. I've got a big thing to do. I'm going to be famous. I'm going to, I've got this creative thing I'm going to recognize for. But to frame it in that way, as this is the artist is the servant of the audience, is a fascinating way to frame it.
I think so, because even if you're sharing something, you have to ask yourself why. Why do I have to share this? Just to express yourself? I find that to be quite rare amongst artists, especially younger artists these days. I find are making to not have people feel alone. I think that idea is coming to fruition with all the social justice stuff, but even without that, we can still be public servants, can't we? Even if we're just doing the frivolous comedy. Escapism is legit. People have hard lives, So I feel like even if you're just doing improv, if you're a stand-up comedian, which, by the way, the greatest stand-up comedian, I think, is a philosopher at heart. Even if you're a painter or a musician, I think you're a servant, because people have to come and take from you. You see what I'm saying? They're taking that from you.
There's a long arc of history there. If you go back to the Greek actors or the people who built the cathedrals or the pyramids or like all of the kind of really ancient great works of culture and art, they were in general anonymous, right?
Yes,
they were working in service of some really higher vision.
And with theater in particular, sorry to cut you off, it's just interesting to note, Shakespeare had the Greeks, they had no intention of this being done 500 years from then. They didn't, like Shakespeare, they didn't even really print the plays, much less consider, someone in 2020 is going to be doing this. It was in the moment for audiences, for people, which is probably why it's endured for 450 years, because the focus was on audiences. And in Shakespeare, you see it in the repetition. People go, why does he repeat so much? Well, audiences at the time were rowdy. They would leave and come back. They would pee in the corner. They would talk. They'd throw stuff at you. They'd be drunk. So
look at their phones.
They'd look at they'd look at the orange before they wipe themselves with it as deodorant because they didn't shower. And so Shakespeare repeats stuff for that. And it's about audiences. It has to be. It has to be. They're our paycheck. Like without audiences, what are we doing? We're performing for each other. That's pretentious, isn't it?
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you to speculate a little bit. Maybe you've already have an answer to this. But so we here, Microcollege, we're focused on education for young adults, focused on education for people during the college years at this very small level. A lot of our programs that we do and other programs that we speak to are very practically oriented. They do farming and gardening. They do wilderness experiences. They do small class like discussion academic work. They do arts and self-governance work. If you can think about a holistic education like this, an education for the whole human being, why is theater an important part of that? And how could we best incorporate that into the kind of very diverse programs that we're doing with small groups of people?
Well, theater in many ways, I think there's the studying of theater and then there's the doing of theater. And you can pull different things from each, like if you were talking about studying theater, the classics are great because they're poetry and they're meant to be profound. And that sort of profundity lives strongest, I believe, in environments like this, where there's a lot of rural area where you can breathe and take in air and sight and sound and listen to the words. I think that brings about a sense of patience. I think it brings about a sense of deep and critical thinking, which is essential. I mean, that's why we need theater, for critical thinking. The doing of theater, that teaches ensemble, that teaches selflessness, that teaches sustainability, particularly if we're talking about outdoor theater. Outdoor theater is convenient, but that doesn't mean it's easy. There's a certain way to take care of yourself vocally. There's a certain way, you can't just build a stage on an area and
you have to be resourceful and creative in solving practical problems.
Oh my goodness, cars whizzing by or the wind or bugs or any of these things. So it teaches a sense of resilience, I believe, as well. But mostly what you get is community. Yeah, theater's about community, audiences. But that's why actors befriend a lot of actors. That's why casts become close. In theater too, acting is the exchange of emotions, isn't it?
Yeah.
And even if you're pretending, it can feel real. And so you feel close to one another. And that's why I encourage people to do that. It's a way of connecting without having to really give up yourself. You can do it through a character. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You see what I mean? There's ways to layer
try
it
on
in.
another self there for a while.
Yes, that's so important, I think. You have to walk through someone else's shoes.
You're talking about empathy, right? Like that's really one way to do it is to actually walk in someone else's shoes.
Yeah, I think so. That's how you understand the best, what one is going through, is to see it through their eyes.
Yeah, it's something that I've told my own kids and my students, and I really believe is that really everyone should seek out an opportunity, should actually be on stage at some point, not just the theater kids.
Right, right. Get on stage or get backstage.
Yeah, that too, right? The people who are up front should also be on backstage.
Yes, and you should get more credit, shouldn't they?
Yeah.
Because, they help the show run, and they're not seen, but man, they are essential. And that also teaches a sense of humility. You know what I mean? Yeah, I'm not in the spotlight. Don't want to be. Don't need to be. We got the job done. Mm-hmm. There's something about being a part of something greater than yourself. That's what I think art offers. This is bigger than me. Yeah. That's why it's servitude, I think.
And often something that you didn't maybe quite believe was possible.
Yes.
Or at least like 2 or 3 days before opening night usually.
Yes. Or like you have 24 hours over 6 days to put up a full Shakespeare.
This is gonna be terrible.
Yep. All the insecurity comes. But you have to keep your confidence. Mm-hmm. That's what theater taught me. You fake it till you make it. Especially if you're like a leader of the group, if you show concern, you've lost them. You know that as a teacher.
Yep.
Like if you show any sort of slippage, any sort of, and then the ricochet effect is after that trust is lost.
And maybe we should postpone opening night. We're not quite ready.
Could you imagine? Oh my goodness.
It might rain. Yeah. So
outdoor theater.
No, it's important for me to remember that theater comes out of religion, out of cultic kind of festivals, whether it's the Greek mysteries or the medieval passion plays, or really theater all over the world. The No Theater we've done here a few times. These are rites of initiation.
Yes.
Right? And in practice, for me, that is often in that moment of, oh crap, we are not ready. Mm-hmm. This is never going to happen. And then they go on stage, and it happens. And students. Anyone going through that experience comes out differently, in my experience, from that. It's an initiation in the highest sense.
Because you're forced to trust. You just have to trust. That's all you can do.
And you're in public, and the lights are there, and it's powerful.
Yep, and the failure is huge, but embrace the failure. That's the only way you're going to succumb. You're going to overcome it. Is if you embrace it. You run away. You can't be ready to enter and thinking, "Am I going to forget my line?" If you do, adjust, or trust someone else is going to come and pick you. I think that's a really good point you made there, about that sense of risk and failure. That's kind of why it's exhilarating and terrifying, and crazy people are the only ones who want to do it for years, for decades at a time, that sort of constant stress.
Well, the other parts of our curriculum in the college here and at the Youth Initiative High School, where I also teach, things like wilderness expeditions, right? We're going to go camping in Wisconsin in January for a week.
Yes,
right?
I heard about that.
Or, I'm going to go for 48 hours alone, right, in a tarp in December.
Wow.
Right? Those are experiences also that people look at and say, gosh, I'm not going to be able to do that. Like that's, and once people have experience and are able to do it and come out, it is also an initiation. People are transformed in a very similar way.
They discover something about themselves.
The capacities that they're not aware of are much more manifest.
And how do you find, being a leader or teacher, it's hard to know when to push someone, when it's like, this is the right time for this challenge, How do you determine that? Is it just over the years you just kind of can tell student to student?
For me, it's why the microcollege idea is important. The small scale, right? I really don't understand how teachers who have 8 sections of English or whatever are able to do what they do. I think because so much of it is based on observation of a student's evolution over time, over months, over years.
Yes.
At the high school level, I've had the opportunity to work with people over 4 years, and definitely have seen them be able to do things in their junior or senior year that they never would have been able to. No one would imagine them being able to do in their 9th grade year. And so that's something to work towards. And having seen it a bunch of times, having seen transformation as being possible also gives me as a leader, as a teacher, confidence of pushing that little bit extra.
Getting to know them.
Yeah. And also developing the trust that they will say, okay, I don't think I can do this, but you asked me to do it, so I'll do it. And then that's another, that's a big kind of step forward.
Yeah. That's important. Students have to feel comfortable, I think, expressing their anxieties. And then I think instructors have to be comfortable encouraging them to not care. I see that in at least in the actor training world, higher education. It's like, if students make a ruckus, faculty, they'll kowtow very, very quickly. And I'm of the opinion, you have 4 professors who have been doing it for 30 years. That's about 120 years of experience. I'm 20 years old. I should shut up. I should be quiet, or I should trust that they're able to see something in me I can't see. Otherwise, why did I come to train? You know what I mean? And I think that ability that you have to see that in your students and give them the comfort to express that is invaluable. And that's why I think microcolleges should be more of a thing, so that people who need that sort of attention can receive it, because you're not going to get it at a Big Ten school. You're just not in your English class. Of course not. Half the time it's not even the teacher, right? It's the TA, depending on the size of the class, isn't it? You know what I mean? So it's like, how much more impersonal can you be? You know what I mean?
The other thing about a micro scale institution, right? This kind of schools of 10 to 25 kind of students, is that to put on Hamlet or to put on certainly any musical, right? And to do many work projects and many other things requires everybody.
Yes.
Right. Here in a small town, often we've also had the experience of sports. Right. My kids are hockey players, and here in a small town, you start looking around. Like, can you skate? Do you have skates? Hey, join the team. And the same thing with theater. One of my treasured theater experiences was, in my college experience at Deep Springs, really a microcollege of about 25 students. We staged with a professor there, Julius Caesar, on the campus. And at that level, definitely a majority of the students had to be in the performance. And so someone would be acting off scene and they'd be the audience, and then they'd switch places, right? And then we move to another place. And in that context, and I've certainly seen it in high school here, we tried to play performances that had everybody involved.
Yes.
Ideally, everyone on stage, including on stage at the same time sometimes. And that creates a different theater experience. It's not just the people who are interested in it, who are especially talented, who are, but everyone has that experience, and it becomes a community forming, bonding, kind of community building experience.
Jacob, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about Percy Mackay. This is in that same vein, right? Except he did it on a very grand scale, right?
Liam, I think you've been reading more about Percy Mackay than I have recently. Do you want to?
Well, I mostly just read about it on Wikipedia, but he did St. Louis, a civic mask. I think I was telling you about this, where there were hundreds of people, and it basically told the story. Well, this was 100 years ago, so it was. I guess St. Louis had only been around for 150 years, but basically employed the city of St. Louis in telling the story of the city of St. Louis. Began with Cahokia, the Native Americans, up until he did that in 1904 and 1905. But it's like you said, you have the students, and let's get every single student on stage, and
or everyone in the city of St. Louis. That's right. The other end of it.
Everyone in the city.
I love that. I wish cities would do that more, but it's too hard to do mega projects like that. But getting everyone involved, you have to. That's how you make a safe space.
Everyone's involved.
Everyone's involved. Everyone don't need to agree. I think the idea of everyone agreeing to make a safe space doesn't, you know what I mean? Yes, camaraderie. But how do we do that camaraderie? And I love what you said about all hands on deck. That was my high school training. I didn't just act. I had to build. I had to be crew boss sometimes. You did costuming. You directed. You helped with light. You helped with sound. You helped with concessions. You learned how to do all aspects of the theater.
Advertising, business planning, all those things that you know about now.
Marketing, running a board. We had a little board of directors too.
The
to run our
casting
little
process, all these things.
Casting, managing egos. you
Yeah.
know. Managing personalities is a huge reason why we should do theater. If we still seek to connect with each other in person, I think if we actually want to connect with each other in person, we'll keep doing theater. I think if we don't, we'll see less people going to the theater, you know.
The thing is, though, when everything else falls away, the only thing we will have left is theater. You know, I don't know if you can call it. You know, when you say theater now, you really think of a building and a stage and a whole marketing campaign and and branded content. But so I don't know if you would even call this theater, but it's text, it's language. When you don't have phones, when you don't have
storytelling,
you know, it's just that's all you'll have. So I feel like the theater can never die. Maybe the theater as we know it here now in the 21st century may die, but storytelling.
No, I don't think theater will die because I think secretly we all want to be in person with each other. We just don't know how. And ironically, theater is the place to teach you how. So it's a loop, isn't it?
Well, I think that is a great ending place, a loop. Thank you, Willie. Willie Jones, thank you for coming to Viroqua, and thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. This was great. This was a lot of fun. Thanks.